Our next presentation is PM 2.5 Federal Reference Method, Overview from Laboratory Perspective, presented by Gabby Navarro of the California Air Resources Board.
Good morning, welcome. My name is Gabby, and I'm currently the primary PM 2.5 Mass Program Analyst. I work for the Laboratory Air Resources Board Monitoring and Laboratory Division. I'll be presenting the PM 2.5 Federal Reference Method, Overview from the Laboratory Perspective. Thank you for taking the time to join me in this presentation. Today, I'm going to cover the goal for the program, invalidation observations and how they compare to the numbers from previous PQAO. I'm going to go over laboratory operations and how we do our part to meet the goal. Next, I will cover trip blanks and field blanks. What are they and why are they important? And finally, I'll go over some common questions. Our goal is to support field staff and work with sample handling staff to provide the media needed for the federal reference program. Together, we work to minimize invalidations and meet attainment. Before we continue, it's important for us to know what is attainment and review invalids, understand how the laboratory operations ensures high quality data, the importance of communicating with site operators, sample handling staff, and management while having an excellent sense of humor. A site achieves attainment by maintaining 3 years of complete data. The data completeness occurs when all 4 quarters in a year have at least 75% capture rate. All the data generated by the field group and laboratory analysis group is used to determine attainment status and make future decisions. This is important because failure to meet attainment status can result in loss of funding and has lasting consequences for the air districts, the local community, and our state as a whole. Now that we've gone over attainment, let's take a moment and observe invalidations and compare the values between 2020 and 2018. I like to give you guys a couple seconds to take a look, make some observations, see if we come to the same conclusions. So I'd like to go over and just point out the challenges first. Hold times were a big challenge. Most of the time these are from samples that are received warm, which means the hold time decreases from 30 days to 10 days. And unfortunately, the samples were arriving warm because of shipping delays associated with a shortage of staff at our shipping contractor. And in addition to that, we also see a huge increase in collection errors, sampler errors, and flow issues. These are numbers that weren't observed in 2018. And it is important to note that site operators did face an unprecedented challenges during pandemic, and this included limited site visits and limited travel. So that definitely explains that increase in those type of invalidations. And now that we've gone over where we saw an increase, I'd like to point out the improvements. And one of the biggest improvements was in reduction in damage of the filters, and contamination was decreased, and expired filters. These are the filters that are used after 30 days. Those filters have expired. So overall, These numbers are very small when compared to the overall number of samples that are collected for the year, but it's always important to realize that these invalidations are used to decide attainment status. And so it's definitely very important to minimize invalidation so we can make sure all the sites meet attainment. Now that we've gone over invalidations and observed the differences between 2020 and 2018, I know everyone's wondering, what do these invalids look like? So let's take a look. Here's an example of a dent, a fingerprint, and a hole. I don't have examples of sampler issues because it really depends on sampler duration and the flow through the filter. If, for example, there's no flow, a filter will look like a field blank and it would just look really clean. There'd be nothing on there. And then depending on how long the sample actually ran, it could actually look really dark, especially during fire season. So speaking about fire season, actually, we would get really dark samples and they would be invalid because they stopped more than 30 minutes before midnight. So it's definitely how the sample looks doesn't tell us if it's invalid or not. It's definitely the data. Let me know if you notice any invalid samples or damage to the filter, or if there's any issues with the sampler, and let me know if I could prepare a makeup sample for you. Now it's time to go over laboratory operations and the network overview as of 2020. We have a total of 16 samplers at 11 sites, which translates to 2,000 samples annually. This doesn't include speciation, and the sampling schedule could be daily, 1 in 3, 1 in 6, or 1 in 12. The total number of samples, as I mentioned, excludes speciation, field blanks, and trip blanks, and any makeup requests, and all of the QC is not included in these numbers. And please take a note that the biggest change in our network since the last PQAO has been a switch to continuous monitors for more than 15 sites. All of the guiding documents such as QAPs, technical documents, EPA QA guidance document, the EPA QA Handbook for Air Pollution Measurement Systems, Volume 2, are used to write the standard operating procedure for the laboratory. The SOP is MLD 055. The validation templates, including critical criteria, operational evaluations, and systemic criteria, are used to set up the quality control for the different equipment we use in laboratory operations. All this criteria is included in our standard operating procedures QC table. This is an example of the critical criteria table. The laboratory operations has a section and the field group has a different table, different section for their critical criteria. It is important to note that failing to meet critical criteria can result in validation of samples. Based on the validation templates, we've set up annual calibrations or annual recertifications for the temperature and RH sensors, analytical balances, and the analytical weights. On a quarterly basis, we verify the temperature and RH probes and the working control standards are meeting the criteria outlined in the standard operating procedures. Daily protocols include calculating the 24-hour average for the temperature and relative humidity of the balance room, checking the analytical balance with working control standards, checking stability and laboratory blanks are within acceptable limits. The stability and laboratory blanks tell us if any contamination occurs in the balance room. All of the filters are inspected for imperfections and damage. In addition, 10% of samples must have a replicate weight. All filters must be conditioned in the balance room for a minimum of 24 hours prior to weighing. It is important to ship back samples as soon as possible after sampling and allow a minimum of 3 days for processing and conditioning of filters once they arrive in the lab. It is important to note that total QC, including blanks, controls, and replicates, account for an additional 50% of weighings. I know what you're thinking. An additional 50% of weighings? Yeah, I know that's a lot, but there's still more QC. The more QC I was referring to were the trip blanks and the field blanks. Field blanks and trip blanks are unexposed filters that are conditioned in the laboratory and shipped with a batch of filters. The field blanks are loaded into the sampler without airflow and tell us if any contamination occurs in the sampler. On the other hand, the trip blanks stay in the protective covers and tell us if contamination occurs during transportation. It is important that field blanks and trip blanks be shipped back to the laboratory with a subset of the batch. Field blanks and trip blanks are always processed with the samples and follow the same criteria. Field and trip blank requirements are 10% of the total number of samples. The number of field blanks and trip blanks is calculated based on the site's sampling schedule. The number of field blanks needed per quarter for each site is included in this table as outlined in SOP MLD 055. Please note this schedule does not apply to speciation. We recently updated the hold times to be consistent with the updated protocols discussed by the sample handling team earlier this week and EPA's technical bulletin. Hold times are determined by comparing shipping temperatures to sampling temperatures. Hold times apply to all samples including blanks, and we weigh samples and blanks regardless of validity status. For that reason, I ask that you ship back all samples regardless of validity status and whether you use the filters or not. Another request I have is please ship back samples to the laboratory often and early in the week, such as Monday or Tuesday instead of Thursday or Friday. This is so that we can avoid shipping delays. And talking about shipping, it is important when making decisions about when to ship samples that we keep our ultimate goal in mind, which is attainment. And we don't want to lose attainment because we were trying to save a little bit of money in shipping. Another really important thing to keep in mind is after a 10-day hold time is missed, most of the sites are unable to run a makeup. So in case I didn't mention it, can you please return samples as soon as possible after retrieval? Communication is a key to minimizing invalidations. In the case of makeups, let us know when you need a sample, and if possible, let us know if you can wait until the next scheduled pre-weight. Email works best. All email correspondence is attached to the original chain of custody and becomes part of the official documentation. Send me an email with any questions. I've learned it is important to do my best and have an excellent sense of humor, especially during those times when things don't go as planned. Yes, that's Michelle and I wearing a tutu on Tutu Tuesday. I'm happy to report no samples were damaged by the tutus in this presentation. These are a list of some of the common questions, and the reality is that it really just depends on what's going on in your site. Specifically with field blanks and trip blanks, it just depends on whether you've met the quota for the quarter. And with the pre-weight sooner, that really just depends on how much sooner, because the filters do expire after 30 days from the pre-weight. So we don't want to ship them out too early. In addition, if you have any other questions, just please shoot me an email. Did I mention? Email works best. My name's Gabby, and I've provided my email here. Please don't hesitate to send me any emails with questions. I look forward to chatting with you shortly in the question and answer section.
Great. Thanks, Gabby, for that presentation. You can go ahead and join me now and Elias for the Q&A portion. All right. Elias is our guest here for the Q&A session. He used to have Gabby's position before she took over. Anyone have questions? Betsy liked the tutus. Why do pre-weighed filters expire after 30 days?
That's actually a really good question, and that's in the critical criteria. It's in the template. So.
Any experiences you want to share on invalidation of media before sending for sampling?
We inspect the filters before we send them out. So if there's any damage to the filters, they are rejected and they do not get sent out to the field.
Can I chime in just to add a little more context for Rebecca's question about the pre-weight filters expiring after 30 days? The filters change mass over time depending on the amount of water in the air. They start to accumulate water and dust. So if they're not used within 30 days of sampling, they've accumulated some weight, which is different from the initial pre-weight.
Thank you. Why does the field blank need to be weighed within 10 days?
So the field blank needs to be weighed within 10 days only if it comes in warm. It would have a 30-day hold time if it came in below 4 degrees C.
Do you send extra field trip blanks per quarter to meet the requirements? And does it apply to co-located units as well?
Yes, we do send extra field blanks and trip blanks every quarter so we can meet requirements, and it does apply to co-located units as well.
Okay, we probably have time for one more question, if anyone has it. Where do the flow checks come in for the samplers as far as invalidation of runs?
That's a great field question. It might be outside the scope of the laboratory. From our perspective, if the chain of custody says flow issues, we take it at that face value. We can't really do anything else beyond that.
Okay, great.
Now, if that is it, we can go ahead and close the session, and our next session starts in a minute here with Elias. See you soon.
See you, everyone.
Thank you.